I was just trying to enjoy a quiet morning fishing on my own land. The lake sits right in the middle of my ranch. Water I've stocked, managed, and maintained for years. It's my favorite way to unplug. But that peace didn't last long. I heard a car pull up near the fence line, and before I could even reel in, a clipboard-waving HOA rep came stomping up like he owned the place. He hit me with a fine. Not a warning, a fine. For unauthorized fishing in HOA-controlled waters. I laughed at first, thought it was a mistake. But nope. They were dead serious. Thing is, I'm not part of their HOA. My land borders their community, but it's never been under their jurisdiction. They didn't own the lake, they never paid for its upkeep, nothing. So how are they fining me for using my own lake? That's what I tried to figure out as more letters came in, escalating the fines and threatening legal action. They claimed the lake was shared access due to a decades-old map, even though it was fully on my ranch. It didn't make sense, until I did some digging. What I found turned everything upside down. They were bluffing, using outdated records to bully neighbors into compliance. But here's where the story takes a wild turn. I wasn't about to fight fire with fire. I found something they cared about even more than my lake, and I bought it. That's when everything changed. After that ridiculous fine showed up, I started talking to neighbors who lived closer to the HOA's boundary. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd been pestering. One guy got a violation notice for planting the wrong kind of tree in his yard. A yard that, like mine, wasn't technically under their control. Another woman told me she got a letter threatening legal action over the color of her barn roof. That's when I realized this HOA was more than just aggressive. They were trying to expand their influence beyond where it legally applied. I started digging through property records, old zoning maps, water rights documentation. Anything. That could explain why they thought they had power over my lake. What I found confirmed what I suspected. Their claim came from a decades-old, unofficial map drawn before the area was ever properly surveyed. My lake was never part of their land. Not even close. But what really got my attention was something on one of the newer land sale documents, a small neglected pond listed under an LLC the HOA used for community recreational space. At first, I didn't think much of it. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. That little pond was their pride and joy. HOA members hosted events there, took their kids fishing, even posted photos online. And here's where it gets interesting. It was listed for sale, quietly. No signs, no public notice. Just sitting there, waiting for someone who knew where to buy. Look, the more I learned about that pond, the more obvious it was just how much it meant to the HOA board. They'd built a gazebo on the edge of it years back, added benches, even installed a members-only sign near the walking path. It was their crown jewel, something they bragged about in newsletters and neighborhood meetings. Meanwhile, they were harassing me for fishing in my own private lake. The hypocrisy was wild. I didn't say a word to them. I just kept digging. Who owned the LLC? Who had authority to sell? What kind of zoning rules applied? Turns out the board had quietly listed the pond property as surplus during a budget issue a while back. They were hoping to offload it without drawing too much attention. I found the contact info of the guy handling the sale, a local attorney who didn't even live in the neighborhood. One call, one walkthrough, one offer. That's all it took. Within a couple of weeks, I owned their precious pond outright. While the paperwork was moving, I kept getting emails and letters from the HOA about the fishing fine. They'd upped the threat, now demanding I cease and desist and attend a mandatory hearing, again, for a lake that wasn't theirs. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I was waiting. Once the deed to their pond was officially in my name, the plan was simple. Not just a win. I wanted a message that couldn't be ignored. The day the deed arrived in my mailbox, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I quietly made a few calls, had a local contractor drop off a private property, no trespassing sign, and had a basic chain-link gate installed on the main trail leading to the pond. I didn't need anything fancy, just something that would send a very clear message. Meanwhile, the HOA doubled down. A new notice showed up saying I owed additional fines for non-compliance, and they hinted at legal action. At this point, it was almost funny. They were throwing threats around like candy, all while having no clue that their own beloved pond was no longer theirs. A week later, they hosted one of their monthly community events, a fishing tournament for kids and families, right there at the pond. I drove by slowly that morning, just to watch. People were already setting up folding chairs, baiting lines, some even carrying coolers. What they didn't notice was the locked gate, the new sign, and the absence of any HOA banners. I kept driving, not saying a word, heart pounding in my chest. I knew what was coming, and honestly, I was nervous. This wasn't just about a fine anymore. This was me standing up to a group that had bullied too many people for too long. By noon, my phone started lighting up. Unknown numbers, HOA emails. One message from a board member just said, "What did you do?" That's when I knew it had hit. That one message, "What did you do?" was just the start. Within hours, I was getting bombarded. Angry voicemails, emails packed with legal jargon, and even a surprise visit from a couple of HOA board members who marched right up to my front porch. They were red-faced, trying to play it cool, asking if there had been some sort of mistake regarding the pond access. I didn't bother explaining. I just handed them a copy of the deed and said, "You fined me for fishing on my own land. So I bought yours." They looked stunned, like they couldn't believe it was real. But that's when things took an unexpected turn. One of them, a newer board member I hadn't seen before, pulled me aside and with a nervous tone said, "They didn't tell you the whole story." That caught me off guard. He told me the pond wasn't just a bragging point for the HOA. It was tied to a bigger development deal, something they were quietly working on behind the scenes. The pond was supposed to be part of a community expansion project. They needed control of the water rights, which were now mine. That's when I realized this wasn't just about some ego trip or misplaced fine. This was about money, a lot of it. By buying the pond, I'd unknowingly cut off a deal they'd been working on for months, maybe years. And now, they weren't just embarrassed. They were desperate. The moment I realized the pond tied into a major development deal, everything clicked into place. Their over-the-top reaction to my fishing, the sudden citations, the push to assert control, it wasn't just about enforcing HOA rules. It was about clearing the path for a lucrative project, and I'd unknowingly stepped right into the middle of it. So I did what anyone with that kind of leverage would do. I called their bluff. I invited the board to a meeting at my ranch, said I'd be open to discussing terms regarding the pond. They showed up suited and smug, clearly hoping I'd cave or offer to sell it back. Instead, I handed them a folder with legal proof of ownership and a list of every HOA fine and warning they'd ever sent me, plus a formal cease and desist notice. Their faces dropped. I could see the panic setting in as I calmly explained that I wasn't interested in selling, leasing, or negotiating. Their development plans? On hold, indefinitely. But then came the twist. Just as they were getting up to leave, defeated, one board member lingered. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "There's more land tied to this than you think, and some of it might already be in your name." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but later that week, a title search confirmed it. In a clerical twist of fate, I had partial rights to another lot they were planning to build on, without even knowing it. After confirming I had partial ownership of the other lot, everything started falling into place. The county records showed a split title due to a years-old surveying error. No one had noticed because the land had never been developed. But now, With the HOA's big project hinging on that exact parcel, my quiet little ranch lake story had turned into something much bigger. I didn't even have to make threats. I just let the paperwork speak for itself. A few days later, the HOA reached out, not with fines this time, but with an offer. They wanted to buy both the pond and my surprise, stake in the other parcel. Their tone had changed completely, but honestly, after everything, I wasn't interested in the money. I politely declined and told them the pond would remain closed permanently. And as for the land, I said I might turn it into a community garden or maybe a dog park, just not anything they had in mind. That was the real win for me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, literally and figuratively. The fact that I got fined for fishing on my own lake turned into a lesson in how quickly people will overstep when they think they have authority. But with a little patience and a solid understanding of property rights, I was able to turn the situation around completely. Now, every time I sit on my porch overlooking that peaceful pond, I'm reminded, sometimes the best response isn't anger, it's ownership.